I just wondered if you talk about the decision to make the film Superstar, and because for those of us who watch the film, it seems like an intentional commentary on anorexia nervosa, but it turns out, in fact, you didn't know when you were collaborating with Cynthia that you were even going to make a movie about Karen Carpenter.
No, we didn't. We look. Cynthia and I went to Brown together, and so we were just pals, and we just both left Providence and moved to New York, and we started to talk about like, would it be fun to do a movie project together, and I've been studying, actually more than Cynthia had at Brown, semiotic theory and film theory and form and all that stuff, and with a very, very strong emphasis with feminist film theory had made a very strong impact on structural theory and cultural studies. But this was a pretty early time for all of that. And I wanted to play with this idea of narrative form and do a movie without actors, and but follow a genre very, very closely and see how the emotional impact of following the form of narrative would trigger the same feelings that we have when we actually watch it, living actors on screen. And so I wanted to do a movie with dolls, and she wanted to do a movie with pets. We just knew we didn't want to do a movie with actors, but we didn't know what it would be about. We just had this fun idea of like not using actors in a movie. And then I was just sitting at Dante Cafe in the West Village. It was playing, it's live FM music before there was like 70s retro music things and shit. And a Carpenter song came on the radio on a speaker, and I was like, holy shit, like I hadn't thought about Karen Carpenter since she had died of anorexia, and the subject matter just deepened and got so layered in the retrospective look back at her life, and hearing that voice, that carried such suffering in it, but that we all made fun of it at the time, and how superficial we thought that music was, but how deeply it penetrated me when I heard it. And I thought that is what we should make a movie about. As I called up Cynthia, I said, we got to do the Karen Carpenter story, and she said, dolls.
Building a world of Barbies, yes?
I did. Look, I thought, as many of us did, like the kind of movies that I would make, I wasn't ever gonna like have a career as a feature filmmaker or anything like that in the commercial world, but I would, like many great examples of people who taught at Brown or elsewhere, that I would make experimental films and I would teach. So I went to Bard to get an MFA. It was a 3-summer program for people who often came with degrees or who were teachers who wanted to get a second degree. And I had the script that I'd written, and was at the end. And I thought we'd get to shooting the movie during the summer. And I just ended up making all the props and costs, sets and miniature, everything, that whole summer. And we didn't get to shooting it until the very end. When Cynthia came, Barry Ellsworth, who was a mutual friend of Christina's and mine, a dear friend, and my partner at the time, Bob Menenti, and we just smoked a lot of pot. And we made this movie together, and maybe it still is the most pleasurable time I've ever had making a movie.
It super screams it from the movie. And we still have it in common, enjoying smoking a lot of pot. That some things never change. I think at the time we both made our first features, and being in the middle of our first pandemic, although we didn't know at that stage of life that it was going to be our first pandemic, and this feeling of making work in relationship to a besieged culture. Like that literally being queer, you were being under attack, and it was like the stakes were life and death. But of course now we're in a moment where we're in besieged culture again. And so, I don't know, I wonder what that time looks like to you, what the role of making films in terms of connecting with an audience and changing our experience of being human means to you now. Because at the time we made the film, I know we both really believed in a kind of revolutionary way, and all of us, Christine and every person involved in it, of bringing deep change in that way. Yeah, so I just wonder, starting from that point, what does that look like now, decades later?
Well, we are in a terrifying time right now. I think we all know all the reasons how and why or maybe not why, but how, and the examples of it. What was on top of so many aspects of what we all face environmentally and culturally, and in a sort of degradation of just a culture that just seems to be becoming more infantile in every conceivable way, and the politics that result in that. Queerness is a newly fair game, and it's an open season on queer and trans bodies and identities and youth, as coupled with, assault on women's reproductive health and on the way we tell our racial history and teach our racial history in this country. So it's a new, there isn't a pandemic that circulates around the panic of the queer body like there was around HIV, which gave a life and death urgency to the kinds of activism you and I were partaking in, but also in a way of framing what making art or making film needs to be, like a kind of weaponized moment where we all felt, we need to engage, and anything that anybody could do was needed to make change. And we did make change as a culture, as a queer culture. And we learned how activism can work in ACT UP,
I think about when Velvet Goldmine came out, and you had made these two movies before, and I didn't realize quite how heavy they were, how dark they were, both Poison and Safe, and I adore both the films. But Velvet Goldmine is such a kind of blast of energy. It reminded me of being 16 and like ripping the cellophane off a David Bowie album. So much of your work is about that, of being a fan, and what motivates the movies of being a fan. You gave this amazing interview with Amy Taubin in Art Forum when Velvet Goldmine came out, and you talked, not Velvet Goldmine, not Velvet Goldmine, the Velvet Underground came out, and you talked about the process of what motivates you to make a film as a fan, and how in making the film you sort of hand that experience over to the audience. And I just wondered if you illuminate for us this process of transference, how it starts as you being the core of the fandom and the love, and then what the act of the movie gives to you. And do you go back and watch those movies again? Probably not, because they're the act of being a fan.
It's a curious process of making a film, as you know, and how it comes from inside you, and you're working through all these things. And this is true even for films I didn't write myself, that you're transforming it from the page to a visual medium, and finding a language that you hope connects with audiences and relates to their experiences. And even people ask me a lot, like, how's it different to work on films that you didn't write versus the films you did write? And I guess I always feel like the films I did write were examinations and recycling of existing culture and language. Like, my films aren't about natural history, they're about social history, and they're about languages that we all share and inherit. And that's why there's I think a return to themes that are often considered natural, that my films try to revise or rewrite as pointedly artificial, and that has to do with like identity and even sexual identity and gender and things that are constructed, and that we all navigate within these histories. Glam rock was this moment, though, that handed the part of the experience of the art of the music to the audience and made your participation in it. It distinguished that moment so thoroughly, and so it made utter sense that I was going to tell this story through the fans' point of view, and it was almost going to be like a Citizen Kane-esque series of false and conflicting narratives about the truth of who these people really were, all funneled through the passion and desire of the fan. You think about like Rocky Horror Picture Show, which came out of that time. It's the only movie that I can think of that invites and demands participation on the part of the viewer. We dress up and we reenact the scene and we go in a ritualized, it's never happened before, but it's completely in the spirit of what happened with glitter rock and glam rock. Not to even mention how much it completely inverted ideas about masculinity and heteronormativity and gender.
Talking to Todd is always head expanding. Since we made films, there's queer theory now. Everything you make is analyzed, described, and fed back to you. But when you went out with I'm Not There, you introduced the movie. I remember being, I can't remember, somewhere in Europe watching you introduce the movie, and you said, like, let the movie wash over you. Treat it like a drug or a dream. And then when you made The Velvet Underground, you said this to Amy Taubin. You wrote her, apparently, asking her for an interview, and you said, this was music about The Velvet Underground's music. You said, this was music that singled you out, identified you not as someone who suffers and transgresses, but who believes in it. This was music that aroused creative desire, and somewhere within its cavernous sound, an understanding that creativity itself comes, at least in part, out of subjugation. So I just, again, wondered if you'd illuminate your super provocative comments about kind of where meaning is in your movies, and the idea that we can just pluck in and extract what they mean. Their experiences may be what you're making in these movies sometimes, right?
They are, look, I think I was speaking specifically about a kind of arena that hearing that music opened up for me when I first heard the Velvet Underground music, and it was like this room, this space where it was like eating a piece of dirty candy off the floor, and it made you understand that feeling the sweetness of the candy and the dirtiness was all commingled in it. What it made me want to do was make something in return. It stimulated a creative urge that had a darkness to it, that took you somewhere outside of norms and into a place where there was some element, and because it was also the first time popular music or rock and roll in the 60s talked about despair and wanting to kill yourself and wanting to feel all these feelings that Lou Reed described in his songs, and making it permissible that we all feel those things in our lives. And especially when you're a young person, you gravitate with all kinds of complicated, disturbing feelings, and that's to be accepted and understood and allowed for, So that was the way that music turned me on. I'm reading Genet again because I'm doing this movie with Joaquin Phoenix. That's a original script that came out of things Joaquin wanted to explore, and I brought John Raymond into the process. So it's this queer love story set in 37 and 38 Los Angeles, and but there's some, it's full of transgression. and Genet, of course, I'm reading the Thief's Journal right now, but it's just like the act of writing is an erotic act, it's a protest, it's an act that singles and removes himself electively from this culture. And all of that, of course, he found the epitome of as a thief and as a gay person who was arrested and relished the darkness and the dirt that exposed him to. But it's all an active voice in the writing that's declarative. It's crazy. and so beautiful, and so these are the guideposts that we all need at times to turn to.
Last question, and I would be remiss not to censure three key women who are Christine Vachon, Pamela Koffler, and obviously Julianne Moore. And I just wondered if you have anything to say about the long relationship. It's just, I've witnessed those relationships, what it feels like, and the kind of just weight and great feeling of those deep collaborations. And if you have anything you want to say.
It leaves me speechless because my great good fortune of finding Christine at the beginning and finding that person who was going to chaperone each project to the death, to the life of its realization. And that Christine, who knows how to work with other people so remarkably well, I think I have learned how to do that as well. But her relationship with Pam is this example of finding a partnership, and it's just like it was something that you had, it was so good it had to be invented, or whatever that phrase is. But Julianne Moore entered my life and read for me for my second feature film, Safe, and I found this creative counterpart in this person who came fully formed as an actor and who understood the lens of the camera and what it saw, and understood how to give and not give to the audience things, stimulants, indications, clues as to who she is as a character. There's a transparency and something that you cannot penetrate in her as an actor. And it completely wakes you up as a viewer. And that's what I've tried to do in the films I've made as well. So I found this person who can interpret that, in this remarkable way. And we've just, again, it's been this ongoing relationship that I just can't believe how lucky I am. And and this. We share Christine and Pam and Julianne.
So lucky.
I know, so lucky.
Well, please prepare to be awakened by amazing performances in May, December, and join me in thanking the one and only Todd Haynes.